Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. Oops, thank you. Let's try that again. Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. How's that? Okay. I forgot actually that I came up with an idea last week. I came up with it again today, which is that instead of going into the bardo that we're examining now, we're up to the bardo of reality. It's really the first true death bardo after the body has completely stopped. And we began it last week, but the really trickier part of this bardo is just about to come up. And instead of doing that, what I'd like to do is discuss something that's foundational to this teaching, which is a doctrine called the three bodies of the Buddha. The term in Sanskrit is Trikaya. Tri means three, kaya means body in Sanskrit. And this doctrine is really essential to understanding the bardos of death. Yes. And also it's a key doctrine in Buddhism. So what I'd like to do is maybe read through an article. What happened was that about, 15 years ago or so, I can't remember when, there was a woman who was teaching at both Naropa University in Boulder and at CU. And the two schools had collaborated a bit, and they were having a kind of a celebration of their collaboration. And she asked me to write an article about Trungpa Rinpoche teaching at CU, which he had done in 1970 when he first went to Boulder. In fact, he was invited by 4 University of Colorado professors to come and teach. And that's why he went there, although he didn't really teach too much at the university. I can't remember if it was just one class, this course. And so what I'd like to do is, I didn't bring enough copies of this, but I'm going to hand them out, and I'm going to ask you to read them. We'll take turns going around the room, and if you don't wish to, it's fine. Just pass. And we'll read a section, and then discuss it amongst us, okay? So it'll be my voice. Instead of me giving a lecture, it's going to be the reading. I thought that this teaching that he gave was particularly extraordinary, the way he did it. And that photograph there on the front was taken of him at Tail of the Tiger in 1970, so it was a year or so before he gave the class. He had just arrived in this country. So if you don't wish to read, just pass, and I'll stop you at some point when I think it's a good discussion point, and we'll use the mic, right? Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay, so pardon the autobiographical part, but it sort of gives you the context.
The type is a little small, but I think I could read it.
I don't know. You want my glasses?
No, I'm okay. The fall of 1970, Bob Lester, then chairman of the Religious Studies Department at the University of Colorado, invited the highly ranked Tibetan Buddhist Lama, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, to teach a course on Buddhism to undergraduates. Rinpoche had arrived in the United States that spring from Scotland, establishing Tail of the Tiger, now Carmicholing, in Barrett, Vermont, where he gave summer seminars on the teachings of Milarepa, the Tibetan Buddhist saint, and other subjects. In August, some CU professors had invited Rinpoche, then about 31 years old, to come to Boulder, and I and another student, Marvin Casper, both in our mid-20s, had asked him if we could accompany him. So, in October 1970, the three of us moved to Colorado, initially living together in a stone cabin with a pot-bellied stove and outhouse at 10,000 feet in Gold Hill, but later moving to a modern duplex in 4 Mile Canyon just outside town. Rinpoche's wife, Diana, joined us after a few months, and the two of them stayed together in the first floor apartment while Marvin and I inhabited the upstairs.
The CU course was to run in the winter semester of 1971. Rinpoche appointed Marvin and me as his teaching assistants, which meant helping him select readings, construct the syllabus, run the class, and conduct discussion groups. He, of course, determined the content and delivered the lectures. At Tail of the Tiger, Rinpoche had given Marvin and me pointing out instruction, the showing of the nature and mind by a teacher, and forged a bond with us stronger than any I had known in my relatively short lifetime. He had recently asked us to start teaching the students who were coming to him from the coast and elsewhere, hippies mostly, without much money, adventurous and inspired by the Dharma in general, and by Rinpoche in particular. We knew very little doctrine, but Rinpoche had introduced us to the heart of the teachings. He felt it important for Westerners to connect to the essence of Buddhism first, so that they would not be dazzled and seduced by the many exotic forms that implied spectacular results, a problem he considered pandemic in America at the time.
The university had a population of about 25,000, including staff and students. This in a town whose total population was about 100,000. The town had a prominent population of Seventh-day Adventists, thus no alcohol was sold within the city limits. There were no malls, and hippies were arriving from the coast to live in the town and in the communities then constellated around it. CU in those days had the reputation of being a second-tier school with a few standout departments such as engineering. It was known to be popular with undergraduates who wanted proximity to Colorado ski areas as well as the overall opportunity to play and party. So our expectations for the class were not high, and we were not disappointed. My memory is that 40 or so students sat slumped in their chairs, the kinds with an enlarged arm for notepads, giving the impression of sleepiness and apathy. In fact, a few of them later became devoted students of Rinpoche. You just never know.
The room was large, stark, bare, and brightly lit by both the overhead fluorescents and the Colorado sunlight streaming in through outsized windows. Rinpoche Ro wore a sport coat and tie, portly with tousled hair. He stood before the class, blackboard behind him, the flat irons visible through the windows, rising 1,800 feet into the clear blue sky. Marvin and I sat in the front row to the side.
Rinpoche presented basic Buddhist doctrine, but with an emphasis on the teaching about spiritual materialism, which he felt was particularly relevant to his audiences at the time. America was in the throes of the counterculture revolution, protests against the Vietnam War, and the invasion of Eastern religions from India, Tibet, Southeast Asia, and Japan. Think Sadhguru, Maharishi and the Beatles, Yogi, Bhajan, Hare Krishna on street corners and in airports, Zen beats, macrobiotic diets, and of course yoga and meditation and Kundalini energy, and so much more. We were all too ready to ape the cultures of these imports, hoping that by adopting their to us exotic forms, we would enjoy some benefit or release from unhappiness. Rinpoche spent a lot of his time debunking that notion, critical of our naivety. He once said to an audience, almost apologetically, "If I told you to stand on your heads 24 hours a day, you would do it."
But the lecture that stands out most in my memory, because it was so revelatory for me personally and so brilliant, was the one Rinpoche gave on the Trikaya, a Sanskrit term that refers to the three tri-bodies, kaya, of a Buddha. The Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya,
Nirmanakaya,
which are to be understood at various levels. This was no lecture on spiritual materialism. Most basically, the term Nirmanakaya refers to the actual physical and mental manifestations of Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as other enlightened individuals. Nirmana is usually translated as manifestation or apparition or incarnation. It is the idea that a person has taken rebirth many times, has died and been reborn over and over again, and that this current birth is the nirmana, or the current manifestation, incarnation. The Tibetan translation of Nirmanakaya is tulku, a term applied to reincarnate lamas, so the Dalai Lama is the 14th tulku, or Nirmanakaya in this line, and Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche was the 11th tulku.
In one sense, we are all Nirmanakayas, tulkus, because we all have been reborn many times. The term, however, is usually reserved for enlightened teachers who take rebirth deliberately, out of compassion and because they have taken a vow to work for the benefit of confused, sentient beings until they have all attained enlightenment. The rest of us, unenlightened individuals, take rebirth not deliberately, but out of the force of our karma. Habit and desire drive us forward in life and in death to continual and uncontrolled rebirth in various realms of suffering. We are fortunate to be human beings in this life. The human realm is the only one in which a being may traverse the path to enlightenment and freedom. But we might not be so fortunate in future lives. According to the Buddhist teachings, sooner or later we will be reborn in all the realms: God realms, animal, hungry ghost, and hell realms. In fact, we experience these realms psychologically even during the course of a day. The anger and panic of all the hell realms, the pride and pleasure of the gold realms, the hunger and sense of deprivation of the hungry ghost realms, or the stupidity, sloth, and fear of the animal realms.
Let's stop for a second. I think we can have a little discussion as we go along here. So what's been presented so far is the sort of the first take of what the three bodies of the Buddha mean in the most obvious sort of exoteric sense, that the Nirmanakaya is the body of Shakyamuni Buddha. It's also the body of any enlightened person, but we're all Nirmanakayas. It's just that we're not enlightened, and usually the term is reserved for enlightened beings, but doesn't have to be, because we've all gone through multiple, in fact, countless rebirths according to the teachings. There's a text that I am very familiar with where it says that if all the bones were collected together, they would fill the universe. If all the blood from our lives, was collected together, it would fill the oceans, that kind of thing. So the first pass, the Nirmanakaya, literally means a person, a physical body, us. He's going to go into the Dharmakaya. That's right. We haven't gotten to that yet. And there's also a reference in here to the teachings of spiritual materialism. When Trungpa Rinpoche arrived here in 1970, he felt that the idea of spiritual materialism, using spirituality for self-aggrandizement, for egotistical bolstering up your ego was pandemic in the West. That everybody was hippies back then, and we had macrobiotics and all kinds of food trips, and everybody was practicing yoga and feeling holy, and Hare Krishna and all that. And he attacked it vehemently. This idea of there are 3 ways that you can bolster your ego. They're called the 3 lords of materialism. And one is that you can collect material wealth to make yourself feel bigger, better, happier. This is called the Lord of Form. It also has a flip side, which was was about in those days too, which is that you could simplify your life and get rid of a lot of materiality and think by doing that you might achieve some kind of happiness. And so we had the slogan, "Don't own more than you can fit in your VW Bug." Remember that one? From anybody? No, you don't remember it. I'm too old. And so that's the Lord of Form. You can manipulate the material world in order to build up your ego. There's the Lord of Speech, which is the manipulation of the conceptual world, the world of ideas. And that has to do with ideologies. You might subscribe to an ideology and feel that you're going to be protected and made safe and big and right and good by subscription to this particular ideology. And it could be Buddhism even. You could be, I'm proud to be a Buddhist. Or it could be being a Democrat or a Republican or a utopian or all kinds of things. I had, as an undergraduate and in graduate school, had been a student of Chinese communism. And in the retrospect, I felt that Chinese communism was perhaps the most powerful and monolithic example of the Lord of Speech that had ever walked the earth. It's the ordering of life according to a set of ideas to achieve a imagined utopia. The last one is the Lord of Mind, Lord of Form, Lord of Speech, Lord of Mind, 3 aspects of being. And that has to do with the manipulation of your mind. For instance, achieving trance states, trying to make yourself happy through psychotherapy, even drugs, to achieve a happier mental state, then you are enslaved to the Lord of Mind. And Trungpa Rinpoche was huge on this subject. He felt that America, we had all these spiritual trips going on. I remember him giving a seminar, and he was smoking and drinking, as he always did, drinking scotch, while he gave the talk. And it was up in Allen's Park, at about 10,000 feet in the Rockies, in this beautiful open-air place. It was a YMCA camp, and they had this, and no walls on this building, just a roof and a dirt floor. And he's sitting on a short stage about 4 feet off the ground, giving a talk. And during the Q&A, a fellow stood up and he said, "Your body's your temple. You're polluting the temple." This guy stood, and I could see, he had his long hair, and he looked really fit. He was probably doing yoga and eating macrobiotic and, and all that stuff. And Rinpoche, there was a dog. Remember, this whole place was open air. And a dog was walking in front of the stage. And he leaned forward and he started barking at the dog. And he was bent over completely, barking down at the dog. And then he looked up and he looked at that fellow and he said, "The whole world is my body." It's different. This food for thought. So this lecture was a bit unusual on the Trikaya. Any questions or comments about what we've read so far or what I've just said? No. I remember him saying to us, he used to say, "Please don't go on any trips. Don't go on any trips." Remember tripping? Everybody was tripping. And please don't go on any trips. And he didn't just mean drugs. He just meant any kind of trip, like spirituality or like that. I remember him getting on an airplane one time, and we were standing there waving goodbye, and he turned around and looked at us and said, "Have a nice trip." and then turned and boarded the plane. Any comments? Nope. So let's go on then. Whoever's reading. Is it Ben?
Dharma is a Sanskrit word that has a number of different meanings, but here it refers first to the Buddhist teachings, the truth about who we are and what confusion and wisdom are, as well as the path to realizing enlightenment and release from suffering. In addition, Dharma refers to the true action of an enlightened individual, a Buddha. Dharmakaya, then, from the historically earliest teachings, refers to the teachings body of the Buddha, the instructions he gave to his students to help them see what is real and to tread the path. Additionally, it refers to the Buddha's capacity to act in accord with what is true and real.
Sambhogakaya.
Sambhogakaya, a term that appeared in a later period of Buddhist history, is usually translated as enjoyment body of a Buddha. It refers to the idea that when one has the eyes to see a world of celestial beings, Buddhas, and bodhisattvas, Dharma protection, teachers, and embodiments of energy, enlightened and not, is present here and now. In truth, we are in the midst of the Akanishta, above all, heaven, the realm of awakened mind, but the Sambhogakaya realm is hidden in plain sight from the unenlightened, who may never become aware of it, who may become aware of it only in glimpses, if at all. It is a world of beauty, power, and meaningfulness, and it is completely available to individuals who have left confusion behind. Bodhisattvas on the stages of the path and enlightened beings, or Buddhas.
Before you go on, let's just stop on this. This is getting heavier now. Sambhogakaya. The Sambhogakaya realm is populated by, I don't want to use the word divine because that comes out of the theistic traditions, but by figures, Buddhas, peaceful and wrathful, as well as other figures that we don't see in confused worlds, in our confused minds. They're here, and they're all around us. And that doesn't mean that they're in the space and we don't see them. They are the people and the figures that we're seeing. We just see them through a lens that makes them into ordinary or less than. But when one has the eyes to see, the eyes of enlightenment, all beings are fundamentally Buddha, fundamentally awake, and glorious. So as you sit on the bus and you look critically at the fellow, riders, you can flip it, and you, instead of seeing a world of suffering and woe, in the people around you, people who are poor, overweight, unhappy, angry, whatever it might be, you can see instead a world of almost divinity that just doesn't know itself. People who are lost, who don't realize who they really are. There's a famous Hindu story that illustrates the point too. It's the Hindu trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma's the creator, Vishnu's the sustainer, and Shiva is the destroyer. And they're sitting around up in heaven and they're looking down at earth. And Brahma says, I think I'm going to go down there and explore a little bit. So he does. He goes down and he wanders the earth, and he takes rebirth multiple times. And finally he winds up as a pig. And he's completely forgotten who he is, that he's Brahma. You know? So Shiva and Vishnu are sitting up there, and Vishnu says to Shiva, look, can you do something about this? You know? So Shiva goes down and pulls out his sword and slits open the pig's belly. And Brahma walks out, you know, and he says, thank you, I needed that, in effect, because he'd forgotten. Well, that's a metaphor for all of us, you see, and it also applies to Sambhogakaya realm, that the whole world is populated by gods and goddesses if one has the eyes to see. And it's a gorgeous, meaningful, beautiful realm, but mostly we don't see it because we're so busy seeing everything in terms of me, 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 what it does for or to me, or if it's indifferent to me. So Sambhogakaya realm is a realm of magic. Most people don't see it, or if they do, they see it in glimpses, just a little flash, and you sort of wonder what that was that went by. Some people, you know, many people never see it at all, and if they, even when they do, they just discount it as an hallucination. And when you die, you have an opportunity to see it, but only if you've trained. How do you train? By meditating, by coming back into the present, by giving up dreams. So Sambhogakaya is a very interesting realm. And we're going through all of this right now that we're going through is the first cut. It's the first pass at the three kayas. So. And please hold the microphone to your mouth because it's, thank you.
But there is another subtler way to understand the Trikaya, and it is the understanding that Trungpa Rinpoche taught to us that winter day in 1971. He did it in this way. Stepping to the blackboard, he picked up a piece of chalk and drew the figure seen on this page. Then he stepped back and asked,
Excuse me, for those who are in the listening audience, it's a picture of a bird, a stick figure picture of a bird. Here, give me your copy and I'll hold it up for the camera. This is something like this. Okay.
Then he stepped back and asked, what is this a picture of? Of course, no one wanted to say the obvious, and there was an extended silence until finally some fellow raised his hand and said, it's a picture of a bird. Rinpoche replied, it's a picture of the sky, and in those 6 words he taught the entire Trikaya.
Let's stop there. Let's just pass it on. And this is where now we're going into the second and more esoteric level. Okay, Frank. Lane, starting over again.
But before I continue reading, a quick question. In that story you just gave, it's a Hindu story, of course, but I'm wondering if the pig is meant to symbolize ignorance?
That's a good one. I never thought of that. Absolutely, maybe. Yeah, but there's such a close relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism,
Right.
you know, and Buddhism adopted so many images and tropes from Buddhism, from Hinduism. So yeah, that's great. That's a good idea.
Rinpoche was introducing to us the most profound Buddhist description of reality as it arises in the only place and time it ever arises, here and now. It is not a metaphysical explanation of reality. It is simply a description of what arises in the moment, now, the only time we ever have. The past and future are mental constructs. Even the present can be conceptualized, but it can also be experienced. In fact, we choicelessly experience it all the time. It is merely a matter of whether we emerge from our dreams about the past, present, and future long enough to notice and see it clearly, truly.
If anyone has a question or anything and wants to make a comment at any time, just raise your hand. Okay?
In In the present, the 6 types of phenomena, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and mental events, which are referred to in Buddhism as the 6 nobles, arise and pass away. A constantly appearing and disappearing display, like a movie or like images passing through a mirror. These things do not endure even for an instant in the present moment. As we turn our head, as our attention shifts, as the light changes and things move, the display is constantly in motion, transforming so completely and continuously that we cannot even point to something that has changed. Is a continual presencing, as they say in Dzogchen texts. According to the Nyingma sect of the Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen is the last and most profound of the 6 vehicles of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. A presencing of what we call phenomena, and this display has 3 aspects.
The first Dharmakaya aspect. All phenomena seem to arise from and pass back into nothing. Where did that sound go? That precise visual experience, that thought, that odor. They arose from nowhere, appeared in the midst of a matrix of conditions, and finally disappeared into nowhere. That fertile nowhere is, in this first pass at a definition, a meaning of the Dharmakaya, absolute reality, the womb from which all appearances arise, and the charnel ground into which they pass away.
Let's stop for a second. And this is really a difficult and key concept in Buddhism, that nothing has any true substance except as we think it, literally think it does. That in our actual experience in the present moment, here, now, everything is passing away as it arises so fast that you can't even point to what it was a minute ago because it's gone already. Like these words, like this gesture, like the tactile sensation of your bottom on the cushion just now, that you notice it. Any comments on this? This is really key. This is the doctrine of emptiness, of shunyata. That nothing has any substance of its own.
But are the words truly gone? They're seeds.
Are the words what?
Are they truly gone? I mean, they're seeds.
They're seeds.
They are seeds to the person that heard them.
Seeds?
Seeds.
Seeds.
Yeah.
Well, seeds means they're already changing into something else, right?
With it, for that person that heard it, yes. True. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, thank you. Where did that word go? It's gone.
Yeah.
You know? But I'm responding to it now with a new one.
Yeah.
It's like it's like a TV screen. Everything is constantly changing on it. You know, the pixels are changing all the time. But so fast, so completely and utterly, you can't even point to the pixel that was there a moment ago, no matter how fast you are. It's just this flow of change. Frank. What is emptiness?
Yeah, I know that's a tough one.
Right?
I'm sorry. How is emptiness connected to this?
I'm sorry, I was assuming, I'm making assumptions. There's the doctrine of emptiness. There's a doctrine, it's called shunyata. And shunya is a Sanskrit term. And shunya means void, empty. Ta is a nominative, so it becomes voidness or emptiness. And what it's empty of is own, O-W-N, being. That nothing has any own being. Everything is a constant display that is changing all the time as you look at it. You can't find any substance, anything that endures. This is the doctrine of emptiness. And it's key because it's applied to 2 things, I and other. And those are the 2 main things. Neither of them has any real reality. They are just names. But we take them to be terribly real. And we wind up having these very fraught difficult relationships between I and other, full of hatred, love, passion, lust, envy, pride, all these things that are very painful. And they're all basically imaginary, conceptual. That's what imaginary means, is conceptual. And it doesn't correspond to what we actually experience in the present moment, which is this continual fluxing. And this is one of the first meanings of, or the fundamental meaning of Dharmakaya at its more profound level. It refers to the fact that in reality, see, these three kayas are really three aspects of reality. And the first one is that nothing has any substance.
When I hear the word emptiness used, it's referring to not physical things, but to a state of mind, almost like people acquiring emptiness is something like that. What does that mean? They just become aware of the fact that things are a flow and they're not solid? Is that the state of emptiness, or the psychologically understanding it?
Well, psychologically understanding it frees the person who understands it from suffering. Because suffering all inheres in the imagined relationship between me and solid me and solid things. Me that has a past and a future. There are three main characteristics to this solidity that we imagine. One is that there's a past and a future. It endures through time. But in reality, the only time we ever have is this present moment, in which everything is changing so fast you can't even find the past. It's already gone. And the future, is just imaginary. So it's just here with this fluxing. The second quality of believing that things exist is that things are one thing. That there's just this one Lane, and there's one John, and one Frank, and one Carmen. And in fact, we're made up of infinite parts. You can't, take away my arm, there's still John, right? It's like you can't really find the essential one thing. There is none. It's an endless concoction of subtler and subtler parts, and in the end, you can't even find the parts of the parts. It's like the idea of atomic theory. It dissolves into energy. And then the third quality of this idea of belief in things is that let's see, we've got. I'm blanking. Endurance through time. Oh, that things are independent. That I exist independent of all of you, but I don't. Each one of us, everything arises continually in a matrix. You never find anything alone. Everything arises in a matrix of other existence. The ground, the air, the trees, the other people, everything. We're constantly dependent on everything else. We're a part of this moving, shifting matrix of parts. So nothing is independent, nothing is unitary, and there is no endurance over time. But we believe in these things, and we act as though these things were real, and it causes great suffering. The absence of this, the discovery that of the world of the present moment, is release from suffering. Because first of all, you begin to realize that I, this thing we call I, is just a myth, like Mickey Mouse. It's created. It's the hero or the heroine of an ongoing story that is playing in our brains. And that story is fraught. It's like a soap opera. It's fraught with danger and promise and all kinds of tension and anxiety. And this causes the suffering in our lives. So when a person begins to discover shunyata, emptiness, they begin to enter the real world, devoid of all these myths, and 2, they achieve freedom from suffering. So that's why this is so key. So let's go on. This is something to be pondering for years.
And yet something seems to appear and pass away. This thing aspect is the Nirmanakaya. There is a presencing of phenomena. The 6 knowable appear. That presencing, am I pronouncing it correctly? Presencing. That presencing is the fact of seeming appearance, the thingness of appearances, and it is all that confused sentient beings know, because they are not paying attention to the present moment, not noticing that that nothing truly exists as they think it does.
Confused sentient beings see the phenomenal world through the veil of static thought. We see a friend or hear a piece of music, and we are consumed with the pastness and futureness of it all. We are in relationship to it, an I-other proposition, fraught with past and future significance for my well-being. As long as we believe that other things and I exist, life must be experienced as a series of I-other problematic relationships. If the other is antipathetic to us, causes pain and unhappiness, then we want to push it away from us. Hatred. If the other promises pleasure, happiness, security, and so on, then we wish to pull it to us. Desire. And if the other promises neither benefit nor harm, then we don't care about it. Indifference. In Buddhist doctrine, these are called the 3 poisons, and you can find them depicted at the center of the wheel of life, a heuristic depiction of confusion as a snake, a rooster, and a pig, respectively.
Thank you.
But seen stripped of concept, nakedly in the present moment, in reality even beyond the present moment, which can be a concept in itself, then the Nirmanakaya is an aspect of the presencing, of the display, its seeming thingness. And it is described as the display of compassion because it can communicate with us in the form of a teacher, either an actual human being or simply life experiences that move us along our path.
I'd like to interrupt you here. This is one of the more difficult ideas in the doctrine of the Trikaya, that the Nirmanakaya is compassion. And compassion is not a feeling sorry for. Compassion is an open communication with the world. And what the compassion of the Nirmanakaya is all about is that this world is full of heat. It's the beauty of blue, the vividness of sour, all the sensations are so beautiful and vivid. And there's a kind of heat, which you could also call love. And in fact, in the teachings, they call it bliss, sukha. And this bliss is the compassion of the Nirmanakaya. It's the fact that this world you could fall in love with it. You know? So the Nirmanakaya is both a teacher who presents, this vast wisdom which is full of love and bliss, and it's also the love and bliss and openness and appreciation for the world that exists in each one of us. This is all Nirmanakaya. Again and again, they call Nirmanakaya indivisible compassion. It can't be cut up into parts. It's just totally itself. And it suffuses the field of awareness when one has the eyes to see. So, sorry, go ahead.
And finally, there is the Sambhogakaya, the aspect whereby, as these things arise and pass away, they communicate to us what they are. The redness of red, the sweetness of sugar, the cold of ice, the sadness of sorrow. It is precisely because all phenomenon are arising out of nowhere and passing away into it again, because they are utterly transitory, that they can and must express their qualities so vividly and beautifully and meaningfully. This is the Sambhogakaya, and it is the realm of magic, not magic in the sense of walking through walls or reading minds, although there may be that too, but magic in the sense of the extraordinary beauty and meaningfulness and value of this world seen nakedly, stripped of the false, ego-centered, emotion-laden thoughts, dreams through which confused sentient beings see their lives. Sambhogakaya is the world of deity, sacred world. In confused world, things are of greater or lesser value in terms of what they can do for or to me. In sacred world, things are of value for no reason of all. This life has intrinsic worth.
Any comments or questions about this? This concept of sacred world is synonymous with the Vajrayana. When you talk about Vajrayana, this is the highest level of Buddhism. Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. These figures on the wall here, they're very colorful, right? These tankas. It's because they are Vajrayana, and they're suffused with compassion. They are suffused with communication, Sambhogakaya. They are magical in the sense that the Sambhogakaya is magical. That's the Vajrayana. Sorry.
And so, seen in the present moment, a bird is utterly insubstantial. Constantly changing presentation, presencing from the ground of nothingness, coming into being and passing away so totally every instant that we cannot even find anything that is coming into being or passing away. In fact, we cannot even distinguish between the bird and the nothing, symbolized here by the sky, which is the womb and its grave. So when Trungpa Rinpoche said that he had drawn a picture of the sky, there were two ways to take this assertion. First, we are so focused on the thing that we do not pay attention to the background, temporal as well as spatial, from which it arises. Look, the bird is also a picture of the sky, lost in concept, seeing the world through the veil of discursive thought. We have been ignoring the ground from which phenomena arise and into which they disappear. This is one meaning of the Sanskrit word avidya, which usually translated as ignorance, the fundamental error that produces unenlightenment or confusion. Trungpa Rinpoche said that avidya means ignoring or not seeing. The literal meaning of avidya, the ground, focusing only on the figure and its significance for or against me.
So avidya means not seeing the ground, because we tend to focus on the figure, the I, me and my problem, me and my lover, me and my enemy, me and my treasure, me and my poverty, and we ignore the ground around it, and we tell stories that are very idiosyncratic to each of us. These are more figures, and that's why each one of us has a different story. If each one of us were to describe what went on in a 5-minute period tonight, you'd have as many stories as you have people, because each one of us sees things through our own lens. I'm sorry, Ben?
Second, the bird and sky seem different, and yet we cannot find the dividing line between them. They create each other and are each other. The bird, as it moves through the sky, is merely a recoloring of the sky in an infinite number of locations. The difference between them is merely seeming, just like an image in a mirror. In the highest tantric teachings, the word sky is often a code word for and interchangeable with space, which signifies the unity of the three kayas.
In Vajrayana, tantric Buddhist practice, one often recites this two-line formula, or some variation on it. Things arise, and yet they do not exist. They do not exist, and yet they arise. The first is what Buddhists call the absolute truth. The second is what Buddhists call the relative truth. Finally and always, the three kayas are merely different aspects of the same thing, which is what is meant when in the texts we find the assertion that the three kayas are one. The Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya, often lumped together and called the Rupakaya, or form body of the Buddha, are in union with the Dharmakaya, the absolute body from which, in the present moment, here and now, everything seems to arise and pass away. Things arise from and pass back into nothingness, Dharmakaya. Things arise from and pass back into nothingness, Nirmanakaya. And as those things arise and pass away, they communicate their unique, brilliant, emotionally moving individuality, Sambhogakaya. To quote a line from Trungpa Rinpoche's Sadhana of Mahamudra,
Yep.
good and bad, happy and sad, all thoughts vanish into emptiness like the imprint of a bird in the sky.
Are we finished? There's a little more of that. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's a picture of the sky.
Yeah, it's the last line. So, comments? Is this utterly confusing? Does it make sense? In part, in whole? It's not easy.
Can you maybe say a little something about how this subject connects to the Bardo teachings?
Because what we're coming to, you see, last week we discussed basically the Dharmakaya level of awakening that can occur at the moment of death, when the body and the mind, the neurotic mind, have completely shut down. All that is left is pure consciousness. And that, if one recognizes it, is enlightenment, and it is an understanding of the Dharmakaya, which includes the other two. See, all these three kayas, they're in unity. They're all different aspects of reality. They're just different ways of talking about reality from different angles. It's like that another Indian metaphor for whatever, of the blind men and the elephant. Know that one? And one of the blind men feels the elephant's ear and says, "Oh, it's like a huge leaf." Another one feels its leg and says, "No, it's like a tree." And the other one feels its tail and says, "No, it's like a snake." And so it goes. And this is what the Trikaya is. It's all different aspects of one thing. But what was the question?
How the subject of the question is how the subject of the Trikaya relates to the subject of the Bardos.
Because what's coming up next week, we're going to talk about the second phase of the Bardo of reality. And in that phase, one basically steps into Sambhogakaya world. If you've practiced enough, if you've come back to the present enough. Most people haven't. Most people are so lost in thought that even though every sentient being, from a microbe up to the highest form of intelligence, experiences the Sambhogakaya in death, most don't recognize it because they're so lost in dream. Just the way we are. We walk down the street, you were going to Starbucks, so lost in an anxious dream, you walk right by it. Right? We're not present for our lives a lot of the time. We're lost in dreams. And so it is, we think that this world is a veil of tears, a sack of woe. And really, what happens with Sambhogakaya is you begin to realize, sure, there's pain, but this world is fundamentally worth being here for. It's sacred for no reason whatsoever. In and of itself. Nothing is making it sacred. It is fundamentally worth being here for. And that's the view of enlightenment. And that is the view that allows one to see the three kayas truly. Especially Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya. These views, you see, ordinary people like us, like me, all we see is a sort of an impure version of the Nirmanakaya. We don't see. I don't see everybody as enlightened. I just see everybody as ordinary people. Excuse me. And so that's what ordinary people see each other as ordinary, and that's sort of the low level of Nirmanakaya. They can't even begin to see Sambhogakaya or Dharmakaya. If a person starts to see Sambhogakaya and Dharmakaya, then it changes the view of what Nirmanakaya is too. It makes it sacred, holy, worth being here for no reason, fundamentally of value, in the moment, every moment. We live our lives so much for the future and in the past, regret for the past and hope for the future, right? This is all about coming back in not giving up the past and the future and living this life as being fundamentally worth being here for now. That's why Rinpoche used to exhort us over and over again. Please cheer up, he would say. Cheer up, you can cheer up. I keep thinking about my friend Michael Cohen, who seems so cheerful right up to the end. It's really a good lesson. Carmen.
There are a couple of lines in the text when you talk about that fertile knower, and related to it as the womb.
The womb.
And the charnel ground. I was wondering if you can talk about it. It reminds me of Prajnaparamita or Samantabhadri, and what you were talking about a couple of weeks ago about that almost reconnection with our mothers. It's like going back to our mother's lap, I think you referred to.
Oh. That's the Dharmakaya, actually. That what you're referring to, that experience. What happens is at the moment of death, neurotic mind shuts down. And there's a description of how that happens, right? We went through it last week, and it's piece by piece, it falls away. And so finally, it's completely gone. And at that point, there's basically two aspects to our consciousness. One is thinking mind. It's always there, right? Not always, but I mean, it comes and goes. I'm having a thought about hatred. I'm having a thought about lust. I'm having a thought about worry, or whatever it might be. It goes through my mind, a mental event. Meanwhile, we can't stop being conscious. We're conscious all the time. We're aware of the floor and the air and the people around us, whether you're having thoughts about them or not. You can't shut it off. That is the ongoing consciousness that never stops. It's called space, and the union of space and knowingness. And within that space, the six knowables arise: objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. They arise and pass away in the instant, in this space. So there are these two aspects to mind. One is this never-stopping present moment, which is lit by fundamental knowingness. That's one of its qualities. And the second quality is the I and other thinker mind. Now what happens at death is the I and other thinker mind shuts down. I dies. for an instant. It's like, it happens to us all the time. It doesn't happen just at death. There are moments in the street, a horn goes off and wakes you up from your reverie, and bang, you're back present. No thoughts for a split second or however long it might last. Right? We wake up, we come back, and we say, oh, I'm at the corner of Broadway and 42nd Street. I didn't even realize. So lost in thought, you know? So at death, there's that another, death is such a shock. The loss, the profound loss, that it wakes us up, just like that horn going off in the street, you know, at 42nd and Broadway. It gives you a jolt. And there's this moment at the end when there's just complete clarity. Now, if you've trained, that means if you've trained coming back to the present moment again and again in your meditation practice, you will recognize that. You will say, there it is. Clarity, thoughtlessness. You will especially recognize it if a teacher has pointed it out to you, because then that makes it even more indelible, you know. And then they say of that moment, this is the moment this is called the Dharmakaya moment, or the ground luminosity moment. And they call it the mother and child experience. The child, you see, is your practice that you've done through your lifetime. It's a little artificial. It's a little self-conscious, right? There's this watcher who's saying, now you're doing it, now you're not. Sitting on your shoulder, right? Saying, now you just had a moment of awareness, you know? And of course, now you haven't, because you're commenting, right? So that's the child quality. The mother is the real thing. And at the moment of death, the child encounters the mother. And if you've practiced enough, you will recognize the mother. And then they say it's like a child leaping into its mother's lap, and there's union and perfect practice. And then that's one version of enlightenment. Now, if you miss that, you go on into the next stage, which is the stage 2 of the bardo of reality, and that has to do with the Sambhogakaya. And that's why we're talking about the Sambhogakaya tonight. The Sambhogakaya is the world of vividness, of communication, of images. Rinpoche used to say it's the world of symbolism, but not symbolism like this means that. This means something else. He said, when you pick up a glass of water, you have the oceans in your hand. You hold a rock and you've got the whole planet, you know, in your hand. It's like everything is speaking what it is so powerfully. It's that kind of symbolism that is the Sambhogakaya. And that's the world of divinity, because it's not divinity in the sense of God and, you know, little human beings. It's just that everything is fundamentally, extraordinarily worth being here for, of value. It's gorgeous.
How do you recognize that? And how do you recognize that and appreciate it without then becoming attached to it and loving it and
you do become attached to it, and that's a form of suffering that has to be overcome.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yes.
How do you avoid that, or
you can't. Everybody has to go through it. Well, I don't know if that's true. Most of the people I know, you know, when they experience this, there's a grasping to it. You know, this is a problem common for teachers. They show the student something, and then it's so shocking and so discontinuous with the student's previous experience in life that then the student wants it, you know, and they say, "Ooh, I had a terrific experience." It's like you're looking at it in the rearview mirror, and that, depending on the individual, can become a tremendous form of suffering that can go on for quite a while until the student wears it out. How do they wear it out? Practice. Coming back again and again, giving up the valuation. You have to give up the valuation. This is one of the big instructions. When you have an experience of this kind of power, don't value it. Let it go. Let it go.
Just let it be for that brilliant essence that it is?
You let it be and you let it go. You don't try to hold on to it. If you do, that's the path of suffering and woe. And a lot of people, it's very, very, very common that people have to go through that. It's part of the teaching. It's just because it's sort of a necessary part of the path for most of us. Because what we're discovering is so discontinuous with confusion and suffering. There's a contrast. Yeah, very common phenomena. It's talked about in the teachings, that people have to let go of it and become ordinary. You have to be an ordinary human being. And the first blush, a person might be saying, wow, look what I've just had an enlightenment experience. How many times have I heard people say that over the years, you know, and including myself. And then they say, you know, I've had a profound experience. I'm special. That'll take you far. There's a real path to suffering. Ben, I hope I'm not revealing too many secrets here. Yeah.
One thing that Rizin Shikpo teaches, before he teaches about things like moving beyond concepts and experiencing, you know, the collapse of the ordinary world and what's beyond that, he teaches about giving up ambition and taking that as a foundation of how important it is to try to move past ambition before you try to tackle these kind of things that can be very overwhelming experiences. And another thing he says is that when you do have these overwhelming experiences, that you have to treat them, as he calls it, like a white crow. So it looks very different, but it's really just another crow. It just looks different. And so those two things combined, you know, are a really important part of how Rizin Shikpo at least presents how you can kind of move along the path of the Buddhist teachings.
Thank you, Ben. Well, any more comments or questions? So for next week, you can read the second half, if you are reading it, of that chapter in Mind Beyond Death on the Bardo of Reality. It's a difficult chapter because it's really about the Sambhogakaya, which is the world of magic, as that article said. So, shall we end with the dedication of merit? By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled.